deal. So here locally, the lines are very blurred between Republicans and Democrats in South Carolina.
Yeah.
The Democrats are very conservative. The Republicans are pretty liberal.
Right.
And you can't tell the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But in national politics, it doesn't matter. If I don't vote for South Carolina, it's still going to go for Trump. And Lindsey Graham's got a tough road with Jamie Harrison, but I think still Lindsey Graham's going to crush him.
Your name's Matt, right? You say Matt?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask? I just want to ask you because I'm very interested in South Carolina. How did you feel about? Did you have any opinions about Jim Demint?
Jim Demint?
Yeah. Jim Demint's the guy who was before. He was the guy before Tim Scott. Are you familiar with Jim Demint?
Yeah.
Huh?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So how did you feel about him?
It was just like lukewarm.
Lukewarm.
I like Tim Scott a lot.
Tim Scott. Okay.
But Jim Demint, trying to even remember because I'm not from here.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you lived there back then.
Oh, okay,
I don't think I did, but I do remember the name.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm sorry. Because I feel like Jim Demint, he tried to he was a hardcore social conservative, but he also was Mr. Tea Party. So he tried to be economically libertarian, but then he was like, "Oh, you also have to be a hardcore Christian."
He was one of the fathers of the Tea Party, wasn't he?
In the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a leader of the
Didn't he resign to
run Heritage?
He resigned from the Senate to run.
He left Heritage, and then he got kicked out of Heritage because he said something bad about Trump.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's why I thought I was interested when you talk about how the lines are blurred between Democrat and Republican, because Jim Demint was a hardcore. The Democrats are horrible. The Republicans are great. But he didn't spend a lot of time in South Carolina. He was a national guy. So I'm just saying he kind of demonstrated what you were saying. He didn't really represent the flavor of his state the way you're telling me. He was more into the whole limelight of the partisanship. So, yeah.
Lindsey Graham is kind of like that. He doesn't do anything for South Carolina.
No.
He's just a nationalist and he's out for himself, but people would not stand for a Democrat being in that position. But they elect Democrat mayors.
Okay.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, now everything I read says the Democrat that's running against Graham has halfway decent chance. Is that not true?
He does. If people get out and vote for him, that's I think historically
they don't vote.
Well, a lot of people wouldn't vote Democrat. I think Lindsey Graham's. If you talk to the normal person, they won't pay any attention to anybody about any alternative to Lindsey Graham. But there is a lot of money being spent for Jamie Harrison. There's a lot of outside money.
Right.
I think he's actually spent the most money on his campaign in any Senate race in history.
Really?
I heard. I was seeing some about that.
Yeah, something insane amount of money. I can't remember, but it's he was buddy with Hillary Clinton. I think he was Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff, and he was a lobbyist in Washington D.C. for a long time. So he's in tight with those folks. So all that money involved with them.
Well, money.
But I don't think it's going to get people to vote. All it is just a lot of hype, in my opinion.
Well, now, the whole money thing. I read an article that was dated. I think it was dated like the 14th of October. How $11 billion have been spent on campaigns this year.
I believe it.
Well, that was about a week and a half ago. That figures up to $14 billion now.
Jamie Harrison spent $57 million last quarter. Wow. So he did break a record.
Wow.
And
quarter.
Last quarter, yeah. Wow. And he broke before that it was Warren. And then I think someone might have broke Warren's record. So it's ironic that two of the three are Democrats.
Yeah. The party of the people, the little guy.
Right.
And that's the other thing. That's how politics have changed. Once upon a time, the Republicans were the party of business. The Democrats were the party of the little guy. Well, 54% of all money spent on campaigns this year were spent by the Democrats.
Absolutely.
So that was the
You're
old
talking about Jeff Bezos. You're talking about big tech.
Yeah.
You're talking about university.
Yeah,
yes.
You know,
yes.
they're the ones that own the party.
That's not grandma giving her $5 to the DNC.
That's a Comcast. Like 14, most of their exec board supported Kamala Harris.
Well, see, and that's the thing, because once upon a time, the Democrats had the people and the labor unions. The Republicans had business. And the one thing the Democrats did that was very successful, very savvy of them, is they cleaned the clock where they had business on their side.
Yes.
And I'm not going to use the S word, but we certainly have a more socialist way of looking at business than we had once upon a time.
Right. We're during the Reagan era. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have the TIFs.
Yep.
I mean, every Walmart gets built partially by the cities.
Right.
And you need another Walmart because we don't have one that's within 2-3 miles of this one. So you throw a big TIF at it and it's subsidized.
Well, that's where the libertarians sometimes, where you saw some libertarians and some of the Occupy Wall Street people agreeing about what's wrong with the corporate federal government relationship. And people were like 50 Cent, where people were like, how could he be a Republican if he also supported Occupy Wall Street? He's not a Republican. But there's certain people, like some of the Ron Paul people, were at Occupy Wall Street. There's a three-dimensional conversation. There are people who are on the far left who actually agree with people more on the right, but they can't see each other for all of the tribal coloring of the other side as being evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. Friends of mine, we were talking about that tonight. That it's like competing realities.
Yep.
That you have some people looking at it from their viewpoint, and they're just so firmly entrenched that it's the competition of it. They have to win the argument all the time. Everybody has to win their argument, and nobody can sit down and have an open conversation about it because everybody feels that their reality is the most important thing, whether it's like global warming or conservatism or liberalism or whatever the flag you're carrying. You can't have a civil conversation anymore.
No. And that's truly a shame because that's how you learn things. You listen to people whom you respect and you learn things. And I'm not going to lie to you. I've listened to people and I've had my mind changed. I mean, not overnight, but people change, things change, situations change. Perfect example. Joe had brought up the whole environmental thing with Trump. I was always a person who was, solar and wind power. It's a waste of time. Well, no, really, it's not. And we do need to get greener. But the reason we need to get greener is not because big oil rules the world and is evil. It's because if you make things cleaner, no one wants to breathe dirty air. Right. Okay. You can't say, well, because it's causing climate change. Well, I don't think it's causing climate change, but
they haven't talked about climate change for a damn year. As soon as COVID-19 hit, all of a sudden the planet wasn't getting warm anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. My theory on climate change is, why we can't have the global warming? Because who owns seaside property? The poor people? No.
Yeah.
I'd like to be the guy who owns some property about a block off the sea and then have global warming. Because guess what happens to my property value? I mean, I'm being facetious, of course, but that's a whole lot of it. I mean, the elite, the rich, they've got more to lose than the average guy. I mean, if I lived in North Dakota, I'd kind of be all for global warming. I mean, think about it. It's probably about 13 degrees there.
Here in South Carolina, they were going to build wind farms just offshore. But you'd be able to see it. So, of course, no way is that happening. There's no way the people that own beachfront property are going to look at wind turbines. But then the oil companies came and said, we're going to put some oil platforms. They wanted to lease to put oil platforms No, we're not doing that either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you go back to the Ted Kennedy days. They wanted to build these big wind farms in view of the Kennedy compound. And Ted Kennedy said, no, we're not doing that. But you're a green guy. Well, yeah, but build your stupid green windmill someplace else. I don't want to look at them.
Right.
So it's a whole
I also heard that
thing.
they're having major problems with getting rid of the wings off those things.
Yeah,
when they have to replace them, like they can't.
I've seen that too, and I don't know if that's a hoax or not. Where I don't know that, because everything is recyclable. I will tell you this: I did work for a company that built the big boxes that the motors sit in those windmills. Those things are huge. They're monsters. They're big fabricated pieces of steel. So, and to get those things up there is quite an engineering feat too. And when that thing's done, I mean, you could recycle the box that motor sits in. It's steel. I don't know if you can recycle the propellers or whatever you would call them, the wings you call them. I think I don't know what they're made of, but most everything is recyclable. So I've seen stuff, but to be honest, I've seen it on the bottom of an article where paid content on an article. So who knows what that is? Right next to the article that says you wouldn't believe this so and so person the way they look now. It's clickbait. So I need to research that before I make that statement.
Well, that goes back into our competing realities. Is if whatever somebody sees on Facebook that's real to them, and they're going to fight to the death for it.
Yeah.
Well, like you were saying, when it first started, and I was a big time COVID observer, because I was like, okay, let's all flatten the curve together. I shut down, boom, boom, didn't go nowhere. Okay, let's do it together. And then other people were questioning, before I even started questioning anything, because I was just like, whatever, they started questioning some of the shutdowns. Because, of course, Trump was, more, hey, let's open things up. And even before I commented, they were people I knew personally were telling me I was literally killing people by letting them post that on my page, even before I started commenting. Literally killing people. Literally, not like figuratively.
Yeah.
They're saying that people are reading my comments and then going out and dying from COVID. And I said, well, that's not how it works. And then I started looking into stuff, and I'm like, man, some of this just don't smell right.
Yeah.
I can speak to this from my own personal perspective in the field that I work.
What's your field?
I'm a first responder.
Okay.
Firefighter and EMS.
Okay.
And I was in ground zero for South Carolina.
Okay.
The first case in South Carolina was in the town I work for. And there were supposedly all these people getting sick with COVID, and I didn't see one. I was like, where are all these dead people that, you think people would be deathly ill and need to be rushed to the hospital?
Really?
There was a few. But these people were not only elderly, but extremely elderly. And even now we're getting like, the numbers are rising. We need to be more careful. And, I've been exposed to it. I didn't get sick.
Right.
But the only people I'm seeing are what I would say extremely elderly.
Like, what do you mean? What age would you say average is extremely elderly?
Over 85.
Really?
Probably in the 90s. Yeah. So I'm like, people in nursing homes that are also have other health issues that,
right,
are basically killing them. And if it wasn't for modern medicine, they would have died a long time ago.
Which is why the deaths are going to be higher than in previous years from now.
Right.
Because those, like you said, they would have already, yeah.
So the flu outbreaks in the wintertime, we would pick up a lot of people who are sick with the flu and need to be rushed to the hospital.
Right.
Every year. But the number one call that I am seeing, that we have been extremely busy dealing with is heroin overdoses.
I was reading about that.
It's daily.
Wow.
Daily. And I've seen, I don't know, I think in the past 2 months, I have personally saved, or Narcan, giving them Narcan and brought them back to life, like 5 or 6 people.
Really?
What? So, but what? How much of